guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up, which April ended up being a pretty all-over-the-place reading month for me. I had a couple of least favorites of the year, but I also had some middle-of-the-road books, as well as a couple 5 stars. So, like I said, very all over the place, but I did end on a high. So we will just get right into these because there's a little bit more than I usually have. So the first book I completed this month was Medusa, the Girl Behind the Myth by Jessie Burton. This is a YA retelling of the story of Medusa with beautiful, gorgeous illustrations throughout, which really added to the reading experience. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars, so not perfect, but I did really enjoy the story overall. It was a really quick read, which made it a lot of fun to get into and just a nice way to start off the month because I finished it within the first couple of days. I loved the exploration of Medusa as a figure and her story from the eyes, especially of a more modern reader where we have different understandings of human beings. And Medusa's story is very interesting in and of itself, so I really liked a lot of what Jessie Burton did here. I loved her writing style. The reason why it wasn't quite a 5 stars is primarily because the second half went in a direction that it was a little outside of the myth, and it felt like the only purpose for going outside of the myth was to push forward a certain idea. And, well, there was another aspect of going outside of the myth that I don't really understand why that decision was made and why the message of this book couldn't be promoted without that change, but there is one, like I said, aspect of the myth that was changed that did make sense with the overall message, and I understood why that change was made. But being where I am in life, I didn't necessarily love it. I also felt like this book was very focused on identity and overcoming trauma in a way that's very tuned to adolescent needs. And while there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, I'm clearly past that point in my life, and so that messaging, that focus didn't necessarily impact me the same way it would have maybe when I was in high school or junior high. That all being said, it was a really, really wonderful story, and one that definitely I think teenage girls in particular, but boys as well, will really be able to gain a lot from, and one that I think if you enjoy Greek mythology and are interested in the story of Medusa, you will at least get some enjoyment out of as well. Then I was able to complete The Warden by Anthony Trollope, and I ended up giving this 3.5 out of 5 stars. This is the first in the Barsetshire series, the Barsetshire Chronicles by Anthony Trollope. And in this book, we follow the warden of a hospital who is also a local clergyman, and we follow him as he figures out that he's being paid as a warden more than he should be being paid. And as such, there's a lot of politics involved throughout the story and as well as morals as this man tries to decide what's best for himself as well as his community and his family, and while others also are impacted by what occurs here, and so they have their own agendas that they're putting forward. For such a short book, I will say Anthony Trollope does an amazing job with bringing these characters to life. Even though I didn't necessarily love any of them besides maybe the warden of the title, I still really enjoyed them. I honestly don't remember pretty much any of their names, but I remember their characters and I remember how they made me feel, how entranced I was by them, and I'm honestly excited to continue to see them in the rest of this series as I continue to read, hopefully soon. The reason it's only a 3.5 stars is really because I wasn't overly engaged in the story. There was nothing that necessarily super moved me, and there wasn't anything that super gripped me, no characters that super I fell in love with, although the warden did come close. Like I said, I did really enjoy his character. It kind of reminded me of the bishop in Les Mis, so, you know, you can't help but be heartwarmed by such a good, kindly person like that, a humble, good person like that, and he was very much that sort of character. But like I said, there was just nothing that really engaged me, there was nothing that I absolutely fell in love with, and there were moments in the audiobook that, despite how short this is, I did feel like it dragged a little bit, not terribly, and it might have also been my mood, to be totally fair to the book, but I just felt like it was a great start to a series. It was interesting. I didn't hate it in any way. It's definitely above average. I think Anthony Trollope did a great job, but the length of it definitely hindered my ability to just fall into it as much as I would have liked to. Then we ended up having a couple of 2.5 stars in a row, which was really unfortunate, and frankly both of them I considered even giving 2 stars, but there was just enough about them that I felt like I should bump it up at least a little bit, so I ended up with 2.5, but they're definitely my least favorites of the year. The first of those was actually a book I read for school, and to be honest, this book is technically meant to be like a textbook, but it is like a fictional story. It's made to be more of an exciting textbook, kind of. But that book is Sophies World by Jostein Gaarder. Definitely butchered that name. But this is a story that is meant to teach the history of philosophy. So it goes through philosophers from the ancient Greeks all the way up to more recent times, as well as tells a story about a girl who is learning all this philosophy from a man who calls himself the philosopher, who she doesn't really know, but who suddenly is mysteriously able to get all these letters to her without her seeing him. He's also able to do a lot of other strange things. So there's a lot of very meta and interesting things going on in this book, which was really fun, especially when it's about philosophy. I think the story was played with in interesting ways, and frankly, it did its job. Its job was to teach about the history of philosophy in an entertaining way that children can approach, younger teens can approach, and feel confident in it. But the writing style made me just want to claw my eyes out. Like, I just could not stand. It was very choppy, and granted it is a translated work, so that may play a role, but I doubt, the way it was written, I doubt it was just the translation. I'm sure the original text had to have had some similar problems. It just felt very choppy, and it felt like, I don't know, it was just not easy to get into. It was really hard to read and really fall into the story. Additionally, the main character Sophie is super obnoxious. She's kind of a brat. She takes every opportunity to say these really like bratty things to the teacher, and I don't know if she's meant to be a brat, but she comes across that way to me, and I just got so annoyed with her. I was like, I would slap you if I was talking to you. Like, she's not very good at patiently listening. I don't know, just certain things she would say grated on my nerves so much. So I just could not give this a higher rating. Maybe I shouldn't have rated it at all, but I did, because I feel like this is meant to still be enjoyed. Like, it's a book that, yes, it's teaching you things, but it was written to be enjoyed as well. It's like known as a classic, and so I feel like it's something that should have the best of both worlds, and it just really did not. So it did its job as far as effectively teaching the history of philosophy, but the characters were not very engaging. I think the philosopher was interesting, but other than that, the characters weren't very engaging. One of the characters, the main character, was actually obnoxious, and the writing style was just not very fun to read. So unfortunately, I did not super love this book. If it's a topic you're interested in reading about, maybe give it a try, but I just, yeah, not for me, and glad I'm done with this class. I mean, I liked this class. It was interesting, but I'm glad I'm just done with this book. Then the other 2.5 star read I had was Indiana by George Sand, and this one was just really honestly disappointing. This is a French classic written by a female author, which is kind of hard to find. I have a hard time finding translations of works that were written by French women that are classics. But this is one of them I found. I read it mostly for that purpose, but also it sounded intriguing on some level. This story follows Indiana, a young woman who is in a loveless marriage. Her husband is much older than her and he's kind of a violent, intense man. He's very militaristic, and she is suffering from a lot of symptoms that we would consider to be depression nowadays. She's very depressed. She just is very sad. She has very low energy levels. Like, she's definitely very depressed. And she ends up having an illicit affair with a very charismatic young man who is just a womanizer, and so you may be able to have an idea of where that goes in this story. but there's a lot of fallout from that. The first half of this book was great. I enjoyed George Sand's writing style overall. There were a few things that didn't flow quite right in my brain, but overall I enjoyed it. But the second half, there's one character that I really found myself enjoying in this book. I thought he was very interesting, and then at the end we kind of get this understanding of who he is as a character really and all his past and stuff. And he makes a bunch of choices in the end that all culminated in me being really just despising him. Like, I just thought it was just a horrible ending, first of all. I really did not like the way this book ended. It was really uncomfortable to read, frankly. It was just so sad, and people were so selfish in a way that it was trying to make you think like, oh, they're in love, they love each other so much. But in reality, they are just all being very, very selfish, and I just did not like that at all. There was also kind of this random new narrator type character that was just thrown in at the end of this book, which I felt like was a little bit odd. And Indiana as a character, I still don't even know who she is. I felt like she changed, her personality and her standards changed based on context, and it really kind of got irritating to me because I never really understood who she was as a person. At times she seemed very confident and very, you know, proud of herself, and not proud in a bad way, but confident in herself in the fact that she knew what she wanted, she knew she had strong decisions, and then all of a sudden she would switch and suddenly be just easily manipulated and drawn in, and just, I don't know. She was so all over the place that it made it hard to really like her as a character, even though there were moments where I got so close to being like, yes, I love Indiana. She never quite reached that point for me. But really the thing that brought this down was the ending. I really did not like the ending at all. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. I felt like it was just a creepy, disgusting, weird, sad, just selfish way of ending it that was trying to look like a wonderful, loving moment, and I just, nope, I did not like it. So there's that, unfortunately. Would I reread this? Maybe. I don't know if I'm gonna get rid of my copy or not. I'm still considering, because I think it's possible that it would be interesting to like buddy read it at some point if somebody ended up wanting to read it and it's been long enough that I'd be willing to reread it. I don't know, but it's one I don't love. That's all I know right now. And then thankfully we got into some much better reads at the end of the month. So the first book I have to mention here is Bring Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. It is the second book in the Thomas Cromwell series by Hilary Mantel, which follows Thomas Cromwell, who was big during the reign of the Tudors. And this book in particular follows the fall of Anne Boleyn, which is in and of itself a haunting time, but this book just wrote it so well. I just absolutely loved the exploration of this time period through the eyes of Thomas Cromwell, as written by Hilary Mantel. The writing style in this one was a little bit easier to read than Wolf Hall. There were definitely things that were harder, but I think the fact that I was more familiar with what was going on in this book definitely helped. I really enjoyed getting to know Jane Seymour in this book. I felt like she's being made out to be a very interesting character by Hilary Mantel, which is very refreshing because I feel like a lot of the time Jane Seymour is seen as just very meek and quiet and not a lot of personality. But it was fun to be able to watch her through Cromwell's eyes as he notices these little cunning and smart things about her, that she's very much aware of what's going on around her. She's not just being led like a sheep to the slaughter or anything like that. She's really aware of what's going on, maybe even more than Anne Boleyn, which maybe is what saves Jane in a lot of ways, not just her meekness, but also her ability to be aware of her situation, be aware of the king's feelings on a level that Anne was not, and respecting those feelings on a level that Anne did not, which ultimately led to an unfortunate ending for Anne. The process of convicting these men and Anne Boleyn was just so haunting to read about. Like, my heart raced. It was just so powerfully written. And yeah, ultimately I just loved this book. I'm glad I continued with the series. I don't know how I'll feel about Mirror in the Light because I know it will slow down a lot, and part of what I loved about this was the faster pace, but I'm still, you know, willing to finish, We'll see how that goes. But yeah, this one was great. So glad I finally read it. Then we have a reread, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars, but that's not terribly surprising with this book. And that was Emma by Jane Austen. As I've mentioned, I'm hosting an in real life book club where we are reading all of Jane Austen's full-length novels over the course of the year. And we're nearly done, which is crazy, but we are reading Emma right now. We're not meeting until early June, so I finished this pretty early, but it was still a wonderful ride. If you don't know what Emma is about, Emma follows the titular heroine as she goes about matchmaking basically in her town. She's very rich and handsome and charming. She doesn't feel like she needs to be married, and so she takes it upon herself to set other people up. But unfortunately, things don't go the way that she expects them to go. And it's a very interesting comedy that shows great character development. It has a great story, but it also is very humorous, which is why I love it so much. There are so many characters that I just adore in here. There's a subplot line that is not revealed to the end that makes it so fun to reread. It's fascinating to see how all the seeds are planted and to follow along with characters when you have a deeper understanding of their situation because you know the ending. So I definitely always love to revisit this. This is my favorite Jane Austen as well, so it's absolutely fabulous. I love Emma as a main character. I love her father, Mr. Woodhouse. He's hilarious. Miss Bates is wonderful. I think Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax are very interesting as well. Mr. Elton and Mrs. Elton and Harriet, and of course Mr. Knightley is my favorite of the Jane Austen men. So I just love this book so much. It's so funny, but it's also just such an exciting character exploration and an exploration of this whole town, which I just adore to read about. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Like I said, it's a reread, so we won't beat a dead horse, but I do love this book. And finally, I was able to finish Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I ended up reading the second half of this during the month of April. I won't talk too much about it because I have 2 vlogs, the second being an hour long, so I have plenty of my thoughts in there if you want to watch that. But suffice it to say, I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. I loved the characters in this. I thought the journey that they went on and the historical perspective that's being taken in this book was just fascinating to read about. Unfortunately, I did not love the ending. I didn't hate it, but there were some aspects to it that made me really frustrated and upset that I felt like I spent 900 pages expecting something to come into being and it just didn't. But the book does end with a little bit of hope that maybe in the future that thing will come together the way I would like it to. So that's all I'm gonna say because like I said, I have a lot of time, vlogging time, in which I was discussing this book that you can watch. But like I said, I did really enjoy this. Even though it's 4.5 stars, there's potential that it could still be on my favorites of the year. I feel like it's one that potentially I could be thinking about a lot the rest of the year, and if I do, I'll definitely put it on my favorites. But yeah, I had a lot of emotions. There were wonderful characters. That's all I'm going to say. We're just gonna stop there before I get too rambly, as I am wont to do. So that is it. Those are the books I completed in April. Let me know down below your thoughts on any of these books, as I would love to know. Also, let me know anything you read in April. If you have any suggestions for me, I am always open to reading recommendations, so definitely feel free to put those in the comments down below. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful week. Happy reading. Goodbye.